Hello, dear audience. Imagine a quiet evening at the edge of a small town where thin rain beads on hibiscus leaves and the kettle on a wooden stove lets out its soft, steady breath. In a house that has known both laughter and long silences, a woman in her early 60s rubs her palms together to keep warm, as if deciding whether to warm her hands or her heart. She raised a son alone. She taught herself to be enough. And yet, when love returns after a long absence, it rarely knocks politely. It stands at the doorway with wet shoes and clear eyes, asking for tea and the truth. Tonight, a man she has grown to trust will admit that he loves her, not with fireworks, but with the durable light of a lantern. He will speak, and she will have to choose, to smile and step forward, or to retreat into the familiar room of her own solitude. When the lantern is lifted, will she open the door? She is known in the neighborhood as Jack's mother, a title worn smooth with years of use. People say it the way they say the name of a respected street. She once gave up on the possibility of romance and called that resignation peace. For decades, the house was just her and the clock, the kettle and the radio. She learned to read the weather by the smell of the soil, to repair the latch when the wind bullied it loose, to ladle soup over rice and eat by the window, listening to motorbikes fade into the distance. But time, like a good mason, keeps building even when we stop paying attention. Jack grew from a boy who scraped his knees on gravel roads into a man who could lift timber, read blueprints, and speak of futures as if they were rooms ready to be furnished. He fell in love with Tu Tien, a woman who stepped into their lives with a careful gentleness, as if she knew this house had lived many winters and needed a spring that did not overwhelm. Since Tu Tien arrived, the house had grown larger without adding a single wall. There were new sounds: the soft tamp of bread dough on a cutting board, the tick of a blood pressure monitor in the afternoon, the shuffle of slippers as three people moved through the kitchen, each knowing where the spoons lived and when to lift the pot lid at just the right moment so the steam danced but did not escape. The neighbors noticed and smiled. Joy, when well cared for, has a scent. Like basil rubbed between finger and thumb, the man who will speak tonight entered their orbit quietly months ago. He was around Jack's age. No, he was her age, give or take a year, though time had been kind to the set of his shoulders and the steadiness of his eyes. He had worked hard as a contractor long before entrepreneur became a word shouldered by bright young people. He wore a watch without diamonds and shoes that were always polished. He carried two kinds of handkerchief, one for his face, one for others. People said he was successful, but what they meant was that his successes did not complain about loneliness. They met at the market, where the air is laced with the smells of guava and metal, turmeric and rain. He had stepped in front of her once, on a day when the sky was a vat of tin and the clouds were broken bowls. Seeing the storm roll in, he peeled a plastic raincoat from his bag and, with an awkward precision, helped her slip into it. She noticed his hands, confident with ropes and numbers, uncertain with the intimacy of small kindnesses. "You'll catch a chill," he said, as though that were a problem he could solve with scaffolding. Other times, he appeared like a well-timed comma. When the door hinge squealed, he showed up with oil and an apology for presuming. When the light bulb blinked and died, he produced a new one and stood on the stepladder, shoulders framed in the doorway like a patient sentence finally finding its verb. He kept his distance, as if aware that women who have spent their strength on survival deserve the courtesy of slow approaches. He insisted on paying for nothing and everything at once, nothing in front of others, everything that mattered when no one was watching. An extra thermal mug so tea stayed warm on the way to the clinic. The sturdy cane she refused at first, and then accepted with a blush when he said, "It will walk beside you when I can't." It was not only his presence that shifted the air in the house, it was the change in her face. Jack noticed first, because sons raised by single mothers become experts at reading unspoken weather. The lines of vigilance around her eyes softened into lines of attention. She began to hum while washing rice, a habit Jack remembered from a childhood before it became dangerous to hope. "Mom," he said one evening while peeling a pomelo, "you look rested." She laughed, not because it was true, but because it felt within reach. Tu Tien, who understood what it meant to be given a room in one's life after spending years in hallways, was the first to bring it up plainly. "He cares about you," she said gently, wiping her hands on a towel. And I think your heart cares too. You don't need permission to be happy." The older woman shook her head, a reflex carved by time. The reflex of protecting a son, of fearing gossip, of being a good example to no one in particular. "At my age," she said, almost laughing, "people will talk." But the simple truth sat between them on the table. People talk until they run out of breath. Then they ask for tea. The day gathered itself into evening with that thoroughness the tropics excel at, turning air into velvet and distance into song. A thin rain stitched the edges of the yard. The man arrived in a dark jacket and a white shirt that had seen many careful ironings. He brought a bag with soft peaches and a bouquet that wasn't quite a bouquet, just 3 stems of lilies wrapped in newspaper. He had trimmed the newspaper so that the headline didn't show. Some headlines belonged to other lives. They sat under the eaves, the 3 of them at first, Jack, Tu Tien, and the mother, talking about practicalities, the harvest, the clinic's new nurse who was good with the cuff, whether the compost pit needed a new cover. Real life is always the prologue to tenderness. Then Jack glanced at his phone. A message pinged from a site supervisor about a misdelivered load of bricks. "I'll go check on it," he said, rising. Tu Tien squeezed the older woman's hand, a squeeze that said, "You are brave even when you tremble. You are allowed to choose." She followed Jack, saying they'd be back with snacks, as if courage needed cover. The man cleared his throat. In the distance, the night market argued cheerfully with itself. A motorcycle coughed and moved on. He looked at his hands, then at her face, then at the hands again, as if asking them to learn a new craft. "I don't have an easy way to start," he said, a modesty that made his voice brighter. "So I will begin like I build, with the foundation." He took a breath that straightened his shoulders. "I have grown fond of you." "No, that's too small. I have come to love you. I tried to keep it quiet, but love is not a good employee. It doesn't follow instructions." She felt heat rise to her cheeks, a warmth like tea poured into a cup you thought you had put away for good. The house had been a witness to many brave things, budgeting rice, negotiating with landlords, fixing broken latches, but this felt like a different kind of bravery. Her first instinct was to retreat into inventory. The groceries that needed to be bought, the patch near the papaya tree that needed new soil, the rumor someone from the old neighborhood had carried like a packet of seeds. She wrapped her shawl tighter. "What would people say?" she asked, almost to the rain. "They would say, 'At 60, she has learned to laugh with both hands,'" he replied. "They would say, 'She found a friend who brings umbrellas and the right wrench.' And if they say worse, 'We will make more tea.' There are moments when life gives you a sign, but it refuses to be theatrical." Her phone buzzed in her pocket. A photo from Tu Tien, young lettuce lifting their heads after the rain, tiny green tongues tasting light, a caption, "We've got sprouts." She smiled. "You don't rush seeds. You don't lecture them into unfurling. You put them in good soil, water them without drama, and trust warmth to do what warmth does." She looked up. His eyes were not confident. They were honest, which is harder. "My son," she said slowly, "is building a life with a woman he loves. They will have their own house, their own troubles, their own laughter. A mother must learn how to become a guest in her child's happiness." She paused, glancing at the lilies because it is easier to look at flowers when the heart is full of wings. "I have always been good at being needed. I am less practiced at being wanted." He opened his mouth, but she lifted a hand, surprised at her own steady tone. "I think," she continued, "that I would like to practice." When Jack and Tu Tien returned, bags rustling, cheeks pink from the quick walk, they smelled something sweet in the air that wasn't the rain. It was the smell of relief. The older woman's eyes were damp, but relaxed, like windows after a storm. The man stood, awkward again, as if he had borrowed someone else's joy and was concerned about returning it in good condition. Jack set the snacks down and raised an eyebrow, the international sign for "You good." She nodded. "We were just talking," she said, and 4 people laughed, because words sometimes hide under coats and pretend to be shy. They moved inside for dinner. It was simple. Omelet with scallions, a soup with chayote and pork bones, and tomatoes stir-fried until they surrendered their color to the oil. The conversation traveled easily across the table, stepping from tomato to tomato like stones over a gentle stream. Jack spoke first, not because he was the son, but because he was the keeper of a promise he had once made to himself, that if love returned to his mother's life, he would not be the door it bumped into. "Mom," he said, "you gave me 1,000 good days I couldn't have bought with any salary. If you choose this, I will be honored to learn how to step back without stepping away." He glanced at the man. "And you? If you ever leave her lonely, I'll come for you with a toolbox and a list." They all laughed, and then they paused, hearing how tenderness often dresses as teasing to keep from fainting in public. Tu Tien reached across the table and took the older woman's hand. "I hope," she said, "when Jack and I grow wrinkled and stubborn, we will still choose each other with this much softness." She squeezed. "You deserve a friend for your afternoons, and a partner for your appointments, and someone who knows how many spoons of sugar you take when you're tired, because that is not a luxury. That is being seen." The older woman, who had learned not to cry at small kindnesses, because small kindnesses had been rationed out like medicine, let herself cry. Not much. Enough. The days that followed did not explode with novelty. They thickened with meaning. Small rearrangements announced themselves like birds discovering new branches. 2 mugs appeared on the shelf where once there had been one. The cane leaned against the door in a more obedient tilt, as if it knew its job description better now. They went together to the clinic, where the new nurse wrapped the cuff around both arms in turn and said, "Numbers look good," with the cheer of someone who has learned to celebrate every inch of progress. At the market, the fishmonger tried a joke about young love, and the man in the dark jacket, who was not quick with jokes, simply smiled and held the bag while she chose the fresher mackerel. For a while, the street hummed with its usual gossip, the religion of places built on proximity. "At that age?" someone asked. "Better late than never," someone else replied. "Better still because it's late," a third voice added, a philosopher sweeping his storefront. After a week, the subject changed, as it always does in communities where roofs leak and bicycles need repair, and the rain insists on practicing its scales every afternoon. Yet, the blessing remained. People saw them walking to the temple one morning, carrying incense and a small bag of fruit. They bowed in that quiet way of those who have walked through sorrow, long enough to recognize happiness when it arrives without its band. Back at the farm, the rows straightened under the discipline of attention. Lettuce became salad, which became strength. The trellis filled with gourd blossoms and lazy bees. Jack and Tu Tien worked side by side, designing a plan in which their farm would teach other farms how to stand up straighter. In the evenings, they returned to the house for tea, finding the older couple on the veranda, chairs angled toward each other like 2 syllables, learning how to become a word. One Sunday at dusk, when the sky held the color of peeled lychee and the crickets tuned their little fiddles, the man brought a small wooden box. It was not a ring, not yet. It was a tiny toolkit, screwdriver, tape measure, a pen light. "I thought we could keep this here," he said, nervous again, "in case something needs fixing, or in case we do." She laughed, a sound with fewer edges than before, and placed the box on the shelf near the kettle. "We will probably need it," she said, a practical romance. Things wear. That is how we know they have been used. Later that night, when Jack and Tu Tien said their goodbyes at the gate, the older woman walked with them to the threshold. She touched her son's cheek, then Tu Tien's hand. "Thank you," she said with the gravity of someone who knows the cost of blessings, "for letting me be more than a mother." Jack's eyes softened. "You were always more," he said. "We just get to see it better now." The house took a long breath. The rain finally let up, exposing a moon so shy it seemed drawn with chalk. In the kitchen, 2 cups stood drying on the rack. Outside, the papaya tree lifted one more fruit into ripeness. In another room, a clock ticked not as a reminder of what had been lost, but as a metronome for what was being learned. The tempo of companionship, the pace of laughter, the practice of inviting someone to sit and stay. And if you were to wander close enough to that house, late, when even gossip sleeps, you might hear an old radio playing a love song that does not apologize for its softness. You might see, through the thin curtain, 2 silhouettes leaning toward each other, talking about tomorrow's grocery list and whether the nurse said Tuesday or Thursday for the next checkup. This is not a grand romance. Better, it is a faithful one. So, dear audience, let us leave them there. 4 people stitched by ordinary days into something strong enough to carry them across seasons. The young couple, blessed and blessing. The older couple, cautious and brave. A house that learned how to hold more than grief? After all those years of living for her child, tonight a mother lives also for her own heart. And you? If happiness knocked a little late at your door, lantern in hand and shoes dripping from the rain, would you open it?